we're going to focus on the proper perspective of the past, present, and future. And this is probably one of the most important topics out there. Because if you have the wrong perspective of the past, you're going to have the wrong perception of the present and the wrong focus on the future. And the results could be devastating. And based on what you believe about the past, you're going to answer these questions differently. Who am I? What am I worth? Why am I here? And where do I go when I die? And we're going to go through these two perspectives of the past. And again, it makes a difference. This is a quote from Jeffrey Dahmer. Anybody know who Jeffrey Dahmer is? He used to kill people and eat them. All right? He said, if a person doesn't think there's a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution is truth, that we all just came from the slime. When we died, that was it. There was nothing. And that's from a Dateline NBC interview in 1994. So that's what he said. And I'm here to tell you he had the wrong perspective of the past. And this is what it can lead to. So we need to make sure we have the proper perspective of the past. And I think his belief in evolution, that's a blind chance perspective, is the wrong perspective. And so tonight we're going to define some terms. We're going to use evolution. All life on Earth is related to a common ancestor that existed about 3.8 billion years ago. This process is called evolution. Okay? And so when I say evolution, I'm talking about molecules to man. And when I say science, okay, we're going to use, this is what they teach in St. Cloud. This is their textbook. I went through them last summer. The National Academy of Science defines science as the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena, as well as the knowledge generated through this process. So science is testable. If it's not testable, it's not science. So guess what, folks? This process is also called not science. Evolution is not testable. You can believe it if you want. It's a belief system. Can you guys see the screen over there? You guys are all right? Okay, all right. Feel free to move. Okay, and what basically everybody believes in miracles. Everybody. Even the atheists and everybody does. There's the miracle of matter from nothing, order from chaos, life from non-life, immaterial ideas from matter, and consciousness from matter. Okay, and they break laws of physics. Matter from nothing breaks the first law of thermodynamics. Matter can't come from nothing. It can go from one side to the other, matter to energy, energy from matter, but they can't get from nothing. Then order from chaos violates the second law of thermodynamics. And then life from non-life, that's the law of biogenesis. And then immaterial ideas from matter. That's called Einstein's gulf. He said that's a gulf that's unbridgeable. Then also consciousness from matter. Okay, and I've never heard anybody even attempt to try to explain consciousness from matter. And I make a prediction. I make a prediction that Eric Peterson will not attempt to define consciousness, how that came about Saturday night. Okay, so let's just put these in the timeline. Where do these miracles take place? Well, on a blind chance timeline, and I say blind chance because some people think the universe got here by chance, and some people think that people got here by chance. So instead of calling them Big Bangers and evolutionists, I call them blind chancers. I just loop them together. So the blind chance timeline is the Big Bang, 11.4 to 13.8 billion years ago. There was the explosion where that's the first miracle. You got matter from nothing. And then this matter becomes more organized and turns into stars and planets and ecosystems. And that violates the second law of thermodynamics. And then the Earth is formed, and then 3.5 billion years ago, life pops into existence, violating the law of biogenesis. And then you get ideas and consciousness, and there it is. So that's the blind chance timeline. Okay, and now here's the creation timeline. It's really small compared to billions of years. Thousands compared to billions is just a speck up there. So we'll expand it out. Okay, and now this is where the miracles take place in my belief system. The matter was created by God, the people were created by God, consciousness, all this order was developed by God. So I got that miracle. You have God there, and then everything else flows. And then the people got here at the top, at the end, and then on the creation timeline, people got there at the beginning. And so people ask me, well, what do I believe? And I know there's churches and seminaries and Christian colleges that are trying to squeeze evolution into the Bible. And that's a big mistake. And so when they ask me what I think, well, I just agree with Jesus. In Matthew 10:6, he said, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. at the beginning, not millions of years later, not billions of years later, right there at the beginning. And if we're not following the example of Jesus, and we call ourselves Christians, what are we doing? You know, we're setting a real bad example for the people we're trying to reach. Okay, so what's the perspective? Okay, the framework. The astronomy framework is the Big Bang, you know, the blind chance perspective. And then the biology is everything came from a single living cell. All the plants and animals and people that ever got here, single living cell. And then geology, all those layers are millions of years old. And then anthropology, you know, that we came from apes. That's what their view is. We're all modified monkeys. Okay, and have they had a good track record? No, they haven't. Their predictions of the Hubble Deep Field Image and the James Webb Space Telescope, they're always wrong. And then they also, they expected to find infant galaxies. And it's such a laughingstock, that Big Bang, is Jason Lyle. He says, I predict they're going to be wrong with their predictions. And once they realize they're wrong, they're going to say that galaxies formed much sooner than expected. And he was right both times. And then in biology, they had junk DNA. They called it junk. And it was a real showstopper for decades because they thought it was junk based on and vestigial organs too. And then the geology, they had the scab lands. That's where out in Washington, J. Harlan Brent said that it came from a glacier flood. I mean, it's got a huge dry waterfall. It's 5 times bigger than Niagara Falls. You know, and he said it came from a flood, and they just mocked him until they got satellite images, and they said, oh, you know, he's right. You know, but he didn't, you know, they gave him a big award when he was 90-some, and all his colleagues were gone. And then anthropology, they had the superior race. Remember Hitler? That's what they were trying to do. Survival of the fittest. That's the elimination of the unfit. Okay, now here's the creation perspective. This is the framework from the Bible. Astronomy, God made everything on day 4. Boom, there aren't any infant galaxies, and we're right. Biology, everything produces after their kind, and the seed is in itself. We see that. That's biology. Geology, there's a worldwide flood that turned everything to zero property value, and that's where we get our fossils and our layers of sedimentary rock. And then anthropology, that's Genesis chapter 11. That's when God confounded their languages and scattered them across the face of the earth, and then isolated people groups got dominant features, and that's how we get the different races. Well, I'm sorry, different people groups. There's only one race, human race, and we're all sinners in the name, under God, we're all the same. Okay, and so how did we do? Well, we did really well with our predictions. Russell Humphrey accurately predicted the magnetic fields of Neptune and Uranus before any probe got there, and he based it on a 6,000-year model, so there's astronomy pointing to 6,000. Then also Kevin Lee has some great predictions with comets and asteroids just within the last decades. And the talk that he gave at the Great Plains Forum, it's the origin of comets and asteroids. Watch that talk, because that will destroy the Big Bang. We just have to have everybody watch it, because it blows the Big Bang apart, and it really, really, really supports the hydroplate theory. Okay, and then biology. You know, we said junk DNA has a purpose, and we were right. And also, the mutation rate points to 6,000 years. So astronomy points to 6,000 years, and biology points to 6,000 years with the mutation rate. And then geology, Russell Humphreys accurately predicted the human diffusion rate of zircons using a 6,000-year model. Do you have a question?
After you finish the slide.
Okay. And then anthropology, there's no superior race. We're all sinners in need of a savior. And we're supposed to love God and love each other. Okay, what do you got?
So earlier you said that there was like no proof of evolution, or something along those lines, but there's adaptation, so what's the difference?
Well, there's variation within a kind. I'll go along with that. You've got animals, and check out continuous environmental tracking. They adapt rapidly to their environment. There's a sensor designed into them, like for blind cave fish or spiders. You look at the boas and the pythons. They're the same colors. It doesn't, if their environment is the land or the trees or the grass or whatever, the colors are the same. And I think there's something that they're designed with sensors. And if you come out to Randy Galuza and listen to him out in Cambridge, he's the guy that's blazing the trail for that, because he was an engineer. He's a doctor, but he was also an engineer. So he's looking for designing things in a human being, and that's what he's finding. And it bothers the evolutionists so much, they came up with this website called The Third Way of Evolution, because mutations and natural selections don't give us what we have. So instead of getting rid of it and believing in a creator, they're trying to find out another way. They have all these rescuing devices. But good question. Okay, and so real quickly, I'll just like there's a attitude against intelligent designers, and we'll let you watch this.
Evolutionists like to talk about how intelligent design is anti-science. Ken Miller, Brown University, once said that intelligent design is a science stopper. Kevin Padian, University of California, Berkeley, said that it makes people stupid. In other words, they believe that intelligent design is something like this. It's a science stopper. But in the last video, we saw how, in the case of junk DNA, it was actually evolution that was stopping science and discouraging research. Intelligent design, on the other hand, not only encouraged research, but made predictions that turned out to be correct. According to evolutionary theory, all living things are descended from a single common ancestor.
This means that at one point, all living things trace back to the exact same DNA.
Under this theory, the differences between species today only exist because of mutations that have built up in the gene pools over time. There's a problem though. Mutations are dangerous. Changing any part of a functional genome is far more likely to harm or kill an organism than it is to help it. Kind of like driving a car down the road. If you're currently using the tires, it's hard to change them. But if the mutated genes are non-functional, if they're not currently in use, maybe like a spare tire, they could be tinkered with more safely.
So the argument goes like this. You and this mouse are different because of accumulated mutations. Those mutations will most easily accumulate in non-functional regions.
So evolution predicts that these different regions must be junk DNA.
A 2014 paper used this reasoning to claim that only 8.2% of human DNA is functional, because that's the amount of DNA that's similar between humans and other mammals. But do you see the problem? If only the common bits of DNA are functional, why would a mouse be a mouse and not you? So some of this junk DNA has to be functional, torpedoing their entire logic. And on top of that, the first point in this argument, we're different only because of accumulated mutations, is an assumption. Scientists don't know that all genetic differences come from mutations. They assume that at the outset because their evolutionary viewpoint tells them to. But what if, and I know this might sound crazy, but hear me out, what if the differences in DNA are what help make us different from mice? Intelligent design not only predicts that this different DNA is likely functional, it predicts that this different DNA might be what encodes the differences between species. And as we learn more about junk DNA, this indeed seems to be the case.
By assuming that much of the DNA that's different between species was junk, evolutionists missed out on crucial scientific data. Others rely on a junk of the gaps argument, claiming that until we find function in a gene, we should assume it's junk. But this argument is defeated by the trend line of the data. We're finding function practically everywhere we look. Regardless, University of Houston biologist Dan Grauer realized that a lot was riding on junk DNA. He too understood that you can tell a lot about a theory by the predictions it makes. He said this: if the human genome is indeed devoid of junk DNA as implied by the ENCODE project, then a long, undirected evolutionary process cannot explain the human genome. If, on the other hand, organisms are designed, then all DNA, or as much as possible, is expected to exhibit function. If ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. In regard to DNA, ID would help science progress faster. Evolutionists wanted us to ignore junk DNA. There's nothing there. ID said, look into it. It's important. Yet there are examples of mainstream scientists charging that the junk DNA mindset held back science. The term junk DNA for many years repelled mainstream researchers from studying non-coding DNA. Who would like to dig through genomic garbage? However, now more and more biologists regard repetitive elements as genomic treasure. Who is stopping science? Evolution's predictions about junk DNA were wrong. and for a long time repelled researchers from progressing science forward. ID predicted function and was proved right. Intelligent design makes better predictions than the standard evolutionary model. And in science, if a model makes successful predictions, then it's more likely that paradigm is true.
So there you have it. How'd you like that video? That's that. Long story short, that's the name of it, really. They got their own channel. I've been listening to these all week, and I just clipping them up, and I don't know how many I'm going to use, but they make complicated things very simple. And so I encourage people to check that out. I think that kids would even find it entertaining, and it's very, very good. Okay, that was kind of my opening statement to the guy, and then we're going to have a rebuttal, and then we're going to have 25 minutes of me asking him questions and him asking me questions. And he's real good at doing gotcha questions. I've kind of got what I want to ask. What would you ask an atheist? Anybody, if you were asking him questions? I'm going to be up in Duluth at the homeschool conference, and I'm going to be speaking at a school to some great junior high and some high school, grade school, whatever. But the main thing I want to get them, I want them to start asking questions. One is, where did that come from? You know, the dog, the house, the person, where did that come from? And if they point you to God or Adam and Eve or whatever, there you go, they're on your team. But if they point you somewhere else, ape-like ancestors or a Big Bang, then they're not on your team. And then if they do say something like ape-like ancestors, then you ask, well, how do you know that? How do you know we came from ape-like ancestors? Is this testable, or is this a belief system? And then the other thing is, are you making any assumptions? And the big assumption that they're making is that there's no God. And that's a big, big, big mistake. So what's happening in our culture right now, we got two views of history right now, and they eliminate the creation one. So they say the best model is this one. You know, and it's like, well, yeah, if you're only in a race with one person, of course you're going to come in first. And so what I'm trying to do as hard as I can is to get this into the mainstream. And even, you know, we can go through these errors in the textbooks, and it might be good. Has anybody not seen the errors in the textbooks? Anybody know what errors I'm talking about? Even if we can't get them out of the textbooks, we can get people to not believe them. And like this one right here, theories that attempt to explain the origin of life on Earth. And it's the prebiotic soup one. And it says compounds can be dissolved in oceans at the early Earth. In the oceans, they can get transported all over the place. And then he says they end up interacting with each other, forming more and more complex molecules that start to have this ability to replicate. And that's not true. Life can't start in water because water breaks apart the molecules. And there's some really good shorts.
We're taught that chemical evolution started in the oceans, but you say that's the last place you'd expect to look. Why?
Well, okay, to build up a big molecule called a polymer from many little molecules called monomers, for instance, proteins from amino acids and DNA or RNA from the nucleotide building blocks, every step of the way, every combination spits out a water molecule. They call that condensation. But if you already have water molecules dissolving these things, then the water would come back and actually break that bond apart. It's called hydrolysis. So if you try to do this in water, it's the hydrolysis, the breaking apart that would happen and not the forming. In fact, chemists who want to make proteins or DNA or RNA, they exclude water as much as they can. They even have water absorbing chemicals to draw out the water. So a primordial ocean is the last place I'd expect to find these polymers forming.
Yeah, it's the water. It's like a fish. A fish isn't good out of water. If there's no water, the molecules can't move. But if there is water, the water breaks them apart. There's so many chicken and egg things, and I'm just learning so many of them with those long story short things. And then this one talks about the range of motion, degrees of freedom, the chemicals can bounce into each other, and then it says that they're constantly sloshing about. Over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms. So it's going to be very interesting to see if the science teacher thinks that's a fact. Because I think the proper perspective of the past is based on facts and logic, not imagination and fraud. Because this is an imagination. This isn't a fact. They can't demonstrate that. And then there's even a NASA scientist who admits it.
rather than an asset, isn't water the enemy of prebiotic molecules? It's the universal solvent, and outside of a living organism, water dissolves life's building blocks like amino acids, sugars like RNA and DNA, various kinds of carbohydrates and other polymers. Shouldn't this chemical challenge be more openly acknowledged in astrobiology? I guess this assumes it's not acknowledged, but what do you say?
I think it's acknowledged. I'm not exactly, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is understanding the evolution from simple compounds that can be made abiotically towards more organized and more highly functional biomolecules that are important for life. So I guess I don't understand.
And so water is a challenge, how these molecules survive.
Because of water? Sorry, yes. I guess I didn't get
Well, I think the question is, it posits that water is a challenge for prebiotic evolution, that because it attacks the various molecules involved.
So in some of the prebiotic things, this is something that people think about. Hydration and dehydration reactions are really important in prebiotic chemistry. And so postulating that life could evolve when there is no opportunity for an environmental separation to allow dehydration reactions actually is a problem, and people do address that.
No, they don't. They don't address it in the science books, not the ones that I saw. And she tried to dodge the question, but thank God for that moderator. He brought her back. So now here's a NASA scientist saying that water's a problem. And I played it at our school board meeting, and they don't care. You know, and that's a PhD. The other guy was a PhD, and this one's probably a PhD too. And it's like, hey, what's your curriculum director's degree? Does she have a PhD? And if not, why doesn't she listen to this? And then there's $10 million on the table. All you have to do is, where'd the information come from? There are so many things that have to be all in place. You guys, the kinesin of the cell, all these molecular machines are just incredible.
Cells are full of specialized components that perform functions vital to their existence. But how do these components get to the right locations inside the cell to perform their functions? For larger components, a transportation system is needed. Meet the kinesin. Masterpieces of microengineering, kinesins are miniature motorized machines that carry cargo from one part of the cell to another, walking along self-assembling highways called microtubules.
And I'm always amazed how those microtubules know where to go, where to bring it. And then my son, he said, well, how do they know, how do they get the energy to move? And that's ATP synthase.
ATP synthase is a high-tech micromolecular power generator inside the cells of your body. It generates adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, an energy molecule that provides fuel that every one of your cells needs to function. Without this fuel, your cells will cease operation, and so will you.
And it's even worse than that. They need the ATP to make it's just this huge chicken and the egg thing. If you go into that long story short and talk about the energy problems, it's just incredible. But yeah, it talks about, if you don't have this, you cease to exist. Well, then the question is, how did we live before we had that?
ATP synthase machine has many parts we recognize from human-designed technology. A rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, and other basic components of a rotary engine. The ATP synthase is one of thousands of elegantly designed molecular machines inside your cells that make your life and all known life possible. ATP synthase. An example of intelligent design.
You think? Yeah, I'd say that's intelligently designed. And yet Eric Peterson, he can't see design anywhere. Where's the evidence for design? We're just looking at the world way differently. It's like, I can't understand why he can't see it, and he can't understand why I see it. So it's going to be very interesting during cross-examination and just see, if he can, I don't know what he's going to say. Then we still got Haeckel's drawings, which were proven wrong 100 years ago. It's just bizarre. I mean, the top ones are what Haeckel drew. The middle ones are what they actually look like. They don't look like what he drew, and they don't look like what each other one is. And the bottom ones are what's in our textbooks. And yeah, how they led to drawn-out lies. It's embarrassing but true. Some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong. And they were wrong 100 years ago, and they're still in our textbooks. And that's at the fair, and they taught it. Yeah, some Sauk Rapids people came by, and they said, yeah, they taught us that last year. And another guy said, why don't they update the textbooks? And I said, these are 2024 textbooks. You know, and I contacted him about one of the things, and I never got back from him. And it's, you know, this one is still appear in reference books. And although Haeckel confessed to drawing from memory and was convicted of fraud at the University of Jena, the drawings persist. That's the real mystery. I think they persist because there's nothing else to put in there to make people believe the blind chance perspective. And we'll just skip over this. Jonathan Wells, you know, he's just incredibly... But this is Eugenie Scott.
And actually, it's been known for 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon. The reason why the diagrams are reproduced is because they're easily available. There's no copyright on them. It's an easy way to illustrate a point.
Yeah, but if you have to lie to illustrate a point, maybe your point's wrong. So she had no problem with it. It's just, it'll be interesting to see what the science teacher says to these. You know, is he gonna, after I show him it, I'll ask him, you know, before I show him it, I'll say, is this a fact? You know, science haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards. And I'll ask him, is that a fact? And then it says, they aren't any scientifically proven positives. And I'll ask him, is that a fact? See what he says, and then I'll say, well, Smithsonian says here's why they're wired backwards. Light has to pass through nerve cells to get to the rods and cones, but that order is no mistake. The glial cells did indeed create columns of concentrated light. And then Medical Express says that the glial cells can guide light just like fiber optic cables. That's an incredible design for our eye. And it says the green and red are concentrated 5 to 10 times more by the glial cells. And then it goes on to say the optimization is such that color vision during the day is enhanced and nighttime vision suffers very little. And then I'll show him that slide again and say, is this a fact? And see what he says. And it'll be very revealing. And Darwin said to suppose that our eye could form from natural selection seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. And I agree with Darwin. It is absurd to think our eyes could come about by chance, and yet evolutionists think it happened 30 or 40 times by chance. If it's absurd once, how much more absurd is it 30 or 40 times? Yeah, and then it goes on to say that humpback whale is actually more closely related to hippos than the elephants, and millions of years of mutations and change have given rise to species from a common ancestor. And I'm going to ask the teacher, do you realize there's over 1,200 PhD scientists that disagree with that statement? Over 1,200? You know, is that how it happens? And these are not just creationists from Clemson and MIT and Princeton and, let's see, UCL, University of California, San Diego, Wisconsin, everything. These people do not agree with evolution. And I emailed Senator Putnam this. It's like when you have your teachers teach evolution, would they also teach this fact? Over 1,200 PhDs disagree with it? And he didn't get back to me. But there's this, I mentioned this earlier, the third way of evolution. It doesn't work. Other mechanisms are essential for a comprehensive understanding. And they don't have it. Then I'll ask him about Lucy. Yeah, is she known for, you know, is she remarkably complete, nearly complete, almost complete? That's none of those. So those are frauds. And they cut Lucy's hip. I'm going to ask the teacher, do you realize that they cut Lucy's hip to turn it from a chimp to a human? Should they be doing that to fossils? And I'll show him. What's he going to say?
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bone seem to flare out like a chimp's.
Yeah, it was a chimp, right?
But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Yeah, it'll be real interesting to see what the teacher has to say about that. You know, is that it's going to be fascinating to see, because he's probably taught this stuff and just accepted it as true. And even when I went to the school board, I have no idea that if they told the science teachers what's in there is false. They just kind of kicked it to the curb. So it seems like they have no problem giving kids false information. And they had the big levee yesterday, and they clog up the airwaves. I tried to call in KNSI and say, hey, let's not give them any money until they get accurate textbooks. But they won't let me, they didn't plug me through. They took a text message that said, don't give them any money until everybody can, at least 50% can read and write. And then he went off on why there's so many second language, but they didn't ask him about the accurate textbooks. So interesting. But anyhow, another one. It says the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay in northern Quebec. And I'll ask the teacher, is that a fact? And then I'll show them, hey, NASA said they found the Earth's oldest rock on the moon. And they said that in 2019. So then I can show them this again. Is that a fact? And it's going to be fascinating to see what he says. Is he going to say that the textbooks are wrong? And I'll probably ask him that before I start. Hey, is it possible the textbooks are manipulated? Because you're going to want to see that, you've heard that we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees. Yeah, you're going to want to see the video that's all about. Okay, but anyhow, and yeah, they found it on the moon, and it came from 12 miles under the surface. How do you get a rock 12 miles under the surface to the moon? It's the hydroplate. And so we'll be doing that maybe next month. Maybe next month's talk, it's the hydroplate. This is the theory that's making all the accurate predictions. This is the talk you need to see. Great Plains Genesis Forum, Kevin Lee. This is a sample.
Because I had become a student of the hydroplate theory, I felt fully confident to communicate with Dr. Brownlee and to predict that what he would find was not what he was anticipating. I'm quoting now from his article, A Mission with Many Scientific Surprises. One of the most unexpected was the 2009 discovery of the amino acid glycine. Now, glycine it's an amino acid used by all life. How could the amino acids have been formed in the vacuum and near absolute zero temperature of space? He was shocked by this discovery. The finding that inner solar system materials formed at very high temperature were transported all the way to the edge of the solar system to the region where Pluto is one of the major scientific findings of stardust. But Dr. Brownlee can't explain how, but the hydroplate theory can say.
And he understands this because he used to work at a naval shipyard. And they wanted him to be an engineer, and so he's taking engineering classes, and he took orbital physics, so he understands this stuff really well. And I think God was preparing him for a time like this, and this is when we can take down the Big Bang. Because we've got him that understands it, and he's calling out NASA like crazy. We also have somebody at the U.S. Air Force Academy who he's the professor of aeronautics, and he's not afraid to talk about a young Earth. So we've got a lot of things, and we're getting accurate predictions like crazy. This one's kind of cool.
There's a strange moon of the asteroid Dinkinish. When the Lucy probe was here looking at Dinkinish, it saw this. Oh, another asteroid with a moon. And then it went a little bit further and took another angle at it. And it said, oh, it's an asteroid with a moon that is made up of two components that are contact binaries of the same size. Absolutely impossible, except for the hydroplate theory. Principal investigator for Lucy said in a statement, I would have never expected a system that looks like this. In particular, I don't understand why the two components of the satellite have similar sizes. This is going to be fun for the scientific community to figure out. No, it's not going to be fun. They're never going to figure it out unless they embrace the hydroplate theory premise of how they were sent up into space. Contact binary systems seem to be fairly common. Now there's, this is common to find contact binaries, which was impossible to them a few years ago until they keep finding them everywhere. But scientists hadn't seen one orbiting an asteroid prior to Dinkinish, and we never suspected anything so bizarre. Details of how this unusual moon formed remain mysterious, and it will remain mysterious until people embrace Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory. They'll never figure it out. Scientists were shocked in 1993 when for the first time they saw a moon orbiting an asteroid called Dactyl. They said it was impossible, and then they saw it. Galileo scientists correctly stated that it is virtually impossible, that the moon is a captured object, something created completely separately from light. It is impossible to catch a moon in the vacuum of space. Now, decades later, scientists have found that 17%, more than 245 asteroids have orbiting moons. And now a moon with a moon can only be explained by the hydroplate theory.
You can see that video on the Twin Cities Creation Science YouTube channel, TCCSA. And I look at where we are in history and what we have right now and what happens if we drop the ball. Who's going to talk about the hydroplate? You know, who's going to, if Walt Brown, he's the guy who developed it. He's on his last legs. You know, I've always wanted to interview him, but I guess mentally he's not up to it. And so, and then there's, you know, Bob Enyart, he was a big proponent and he died a couple of years ago. And so we need to get this in the mainstream because this is the battering ram that destroys evolution. God was preparing Kevin Lee so he understands this stuff. God's got a professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy. We have the time is now. We got the wind at our back. We got accurate predictions. They find DNA in Bennu. They find this other. They find something in these asteroids, Ryugu, finding stuff that just comes from the Earth. And this is when we can be the battering ram and get rid of it. But we have to bring it into the mainstream. So I'm giving it to you guys. And hopefully you guys will go onto these websites and start sharing it. You know, I've got a playlist just for the hydroplate. It is the funnest theory to learn because it explains so many things. But we need to get it into the mainstream however you can. Because if we drop the ball, who's going to do it? You know, I was going to go to the science conference, Creation Science Conference in St. Louis to talk to the scientists about this, get a table there or something. And then one of the guys says, hey, don't waste your time, their mind's made up, go to the homeschoolers. So I'm going to Des Moines, I'm going to Duluth, and I'm going to talk to the homeschoolers. We need to pass this on because we can destroy the Big Bang. And if we can get the CPT guys and the HPT guys at a round table, and then get the creationists united around one of them, and I'm pretty biased one way, I think then we can really make big impact. So that's where we're at. We're at an exciting time. And I'm not sure if you realize how exciting this is. We're watching the evolution fall apart, we're watching the Big Bang fall apart, we're watching plate tectonics fall apart, and the origin of life fall apart. And this is exciting. We have to let other people know because the people in charge don't want to loot. They don't want things to change. They got all the power. So it's up to us to share this message with people so that they don't believe the people in power. And so and again, this is a tremendous gift that God's given us, and He's equipped Pastor Kevin Lee for this. And what are we going to do with it? So I encourage you to do something with it. You know, and but anyhow, this will show up on YouTube eventually. There's something about life somehow. You know, this is our science textbooks. They're trying to talk about how life began. Well, to the best of our knowledge, remember they got rid of the other option. You know, either nature did it or nature didn't do it, and they got rid of the nature didn't do it. So this is the best of our knowledge over here. They should say to the best of our atheistic knowledge. You know, this is how they're trying to explain life on Earth, and basically it rained on the rock for millions of years. Kent Hovind, he would say that. He'd say evolutionists believe they came from a rock. And a professor came up to him, a lady up to one time, she goes, we do not believe we came from a rock. It was afterwards. And he goes, well, calm down. Where did we come from? And first he goes, do you believe in evolution? And she said, yeah, I teach at the university. And he said, well, where did we come from? And she said, we came from the macromolecule. And he said, well, where did that come from? She said, from the prebiotic soup. And he said, well, where did that come from? And she said, well, it rained on the rock for millions of years. So she finally realized they believed they came from a rock. And that's what it says in this book. It rained on the rock for millions of years, and then guess how life came about? Somehow. It's in a science book. Somehow, despite this harsh environment, living organisms appeared. Somehow is not a science word. Somehow should not be in there. But that's the only one they are allowed. And I was in Virginia talking to a science instructor at a college, and he was a Christian. And he said he always has his students have a journal of fuzzy words. And somehow is about as fuzzy as they get. Somehow, might have, could have, probably. You know, then they know when they're being taught science, which is testable, and when they're being taught a belief system of the past based on somehow. And again, I think the proper perspective of the past will be based on facts and logic, not imagination and fraud. Carl Werner, he's got a whole 3 volumes on the fraud of human evolution. And 150 frauds there. And if your theory's right, you don't need frauds. Okay, so let's wrap this up. So we got 2 perspectives of the past, and one of them is based on blind chance and imagination and fraud, and that would be the blind chance timeline. You have the Oort cloud, which is imagined so that we can still have comets in the solar system because they can't last millions of years. So they imagine they come from the Oort cloud. You got the multiverse because our universe is so finely tuned that you adjust anything, it's not going to happen. They thought, well, if there's an infinite number of galaxies, of course one of them will be right, and we just happen to be in one. So the multiverse is another rescuing device. That's imagination. The dynamo, our Earth's magnetic field is declining at 1400, the half-life of the Earth's magnetic field is 1400 years. So some people I've read where it's 10,000 or 20,000 years, it's just going to be ripping the crust off the Earth, ripping the iron out of blood, it's going to turn the Earth into a neutron star. So it can't be millions of years old, so they invent a dynamo. But the real question is, if we're billions of years old, why would we have a magnetic field at all? Well, so they have to imagine a dynamo. And then you got these spiral galaxies that'd be wound up in a few million years, but they're not. So they invent dark matter, which is like 23% of the universe. You can't observe it. Light goes right through it. It's just, yeah, you can imagine a lot of things. And then our universe is expanding at an accelerating rate. And they invent dark energy. And that's like 73% of the universe. And so the dark matter plus dark energy equals 96% of everything. And if their theory can only explain 4% of everything, you've got to get a new theory. And then they talked about junk DNA, and it wasn't junk. They also had vestigial organs where they take out tonsils and appendices, saying that they weren't useful, and they are useful. Jerry Bergman talks about a study of these people, I forget where they were, but if they had their tonsils out, they were less healthy than the ones that didn't. Then he goes through and he has got like 4 different functions for the appendix. And then they say the tailbone. In ICR they say, well, if it's vestigial, we'll pay to take yours out, but you got to pay for the diapers you're going to need the rest of your life. You know, so that's one perspective of the past, and I don't think that's the proper perspective. But yet that's all that's being taught to the kids. And then you get people like Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, and then there's the creation timeline. And I think that's based on logic and facts. It's logical. A painting had a painter, a building had a builder, and a creation had a creator. It's consistent. I think it's absurd to the nth degree to think this building couldn't get put together by blind chance, but our bodies did. That just doesn't make sense. And I talk to the college students a lot with that word. And it's like, how could our bodies get put together? And then you see the wheels turn. And we had a kiosk there on Tuesday. And praise the Lord for Marcus. And he gets the kiosk so I can be inside again. And somebody came up and he said, yeah, you know, we talked to you in the sidewalk last whatever. And he says, yeah, nice things pop out at my book now. And I talked to my instructors about it. It's like, this doesn't make sense. And good for you. Good for you. And then, yeah, so it's logical and it's based on facts. We don't need rescuing devices. We don't have to imagine things to prop up our theory. And we certainly don't have to change fossils to make it fit. So this is the proper perspective of the past. You know, we can explain comets without the Oort cloud. We can explain the universe without the fine-tuned universe without the multiverse. We can explain our magnetic field without the dynamo. And we can have young galaxies without dark energy. And we have accurate predictions. Oh man, do we have accurate predictions. We really have the wind at our back. We need to do that. Because about all they can do now is make it illegal to criticize the Big Bang or evolution. And I've seen headlines, you know, years ago, but that's about all they can do. So we've got to make sure we get everybody informed so that they don't believe the lies of Satan. And then we don't violate the laws of physics. You know, we just have to change the definition of science. Allow for a supernatural creator to make a natural creation, and then everything fits. Like I pointed out earlier, if you get rid of God, now you got to believe matter comes from nothing. It gets more organized, life from non-life, ideas from matter, and consciousness from matter. And it's just, then we don't have the superior race, and we can explain dinosaurs. And so I think the proper perspective of the past is the Creator revealed himself in a book that is scientifically, historically, archaeologically, and prophetically accurate. And there's a website I think you guys would really enjoy. It's called Expedition Bible, I think it's called. And they just came out with this discovery in Nineveh. They got the Taylor prism, and it talks about what's it called? Sennacherib or whatever. And they found this palace in Nineveh, and on the relief they got this siege of Lachish, not Jerusalem. You'd think they'd want to put there, but it's Lachish. And then they went to Lachish and they found the siege wall and all that stuff. They didn't put Jerusalem there because God did a miracle and slayed 185,000 of those, would they be Assyrians? They died, And it's just, they can look in the dirt and find bones and say they're millions of years. I look in the dirt and I find stuff that points to the Bible. And I think that's the proper perspective of the past. That was Expedition Bible, I think. He did a really good job. And then he's got Sodom and Gomorrah. He found sulfur balls and he burned them. And it's like, yeah, the Bible's true. Yeah, the Bible's true. And there's a lot more evidence for the Bible than for nothing turning into everything. And also this book talks about a flood that says that God judges sin. He judged it in the past, he's going to judge it again, but he's given us a lifeboat called Jesus. You could have been in the ark to escape the judgment, and this next one, you need to be in Jesus. Okay, and so let's wrap this up. What do you believe about the past? If a blind chance is true, if there is no God, who am I? I'm a mutated animal. What am I worth? Not much. Actually, there's too many of us carbon forms. They got to get rid of some of us to save the planet. And why am I here? No reason. I could be Adolf Hitler, I could be Mother Teresa. I go to the same place. It doesn't matter. Or I could be Jeffrey Dahmer. Who cares? And where do I go when I die? It doesn't matter. And so that's if the blind chance perspective is true, and I think it's not. I think the proper perspective is there's a creator. And who am I? I'm made in the image of God. And what am I worth? I'm priceless. You know what Jesus did so I can go to heaven? He gave everything so I can go to heaven. And why am I here? It's to glorify God. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. Love God and love others. And I think one of the most loving things you can do is share the gospel with them so they have an opportunity to go to heaven. So pray for Eric Peterson. I pray, and I'm looking at this as my mission field. And I want him to put his faith in Christ. And pray that the blinders would be removed so he can see the truth clearly. Okay, and that's why we're here, to glorify God. And the only thing that matters in 100 years is, are you in heaven and who's there with you? At St. Cloud State, a psych major came up and, what are you doing here? I get that question sometimes. And I said, well, if you saw a blind person walking towards a cliff, would you warn them? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, that's what I see. People who are blinded, they're walking towards a cliff, and if they go off without Jesus, they're in hell. Someone's got to warn them. They can go there if they want, but they got to walk by me first. They can consciously reject Jesus, and then they'll have nobody to blame but themselves for eternity. And then where do I go with the day? I'm going to heaven. I put my faith in Christ. My sins are paid for. Praise God for that. It's nothing that I'm doing that's going to get me there. It's everything that Jesus did. And I just love the gospel message. And so with that, any questions? I sure do appreciate you guys coming.